Thank you, Ben. Robin Miller, please.
Thank you, Chair. Gentlemen, good morning. Thanks for your time here. I'd like to look at a couple of areas. Firstly, the intergovernmental relations, but also looking a little at the funding arrangements between UK government and Wales. Firstly, with regard to intergovernmental relations, have you noticed any change since the introduction of the changes to the intergovernmental structures, Secretary of State?
Any changes to
the effectiveness of the relationship?
I occasionally accused of being overly optimistic and upbeat about these things. I think politics and intergovernmental relations is supposed to be difficult. It's meant to be difficult. We wrestle with difficult, complicated issues which are either have huge social, economic, or indeed political consequences. The idea that there would ever be a scenario where we could all sing in perfect harmony, I think is completely unrealistic, and by the way, not especially healthy. I remember there used to be extraordinary tensions between Rodri Morgan and Tony Blair, representatives of different parliaments, but apparently on the same side. But they argued like hell around some of these things. So I think the relationship is quite good because we all know who we're supposed to talk to and when we're supposed to talk to them. Do we agree occasionally? Do we have very friendly debates most of the time?
Let me move on then to think about some of the programmes and the projects. Have you seen programmes or projects in Wales that have been enhanced as a result of the new working relationships?
Gosh, that's a loaded question, David. Yes.
Well, growth deals. I mean, growth deals would be a good example. I mean, they're joint projects, jointly funded by UK and Welsh government. There have been occasional, I wouldn't say frictions, but occasional brisk discussions around certain aspects of them. But by and large, certainly at the official level, things work very well. And I think at ministerial level, I mean, I've been undertaking a number of visits to projects that are either being completed, like the Swansea Digital Arena, or ones which are hopefully going to on which work is going to start soon. I'm going to North Wales for the Digital Processing Centre visit later on this month. There'll be other ministers there. I think the First Minister may be attending that one. So by and large,
I think it's another good example. Yeah. Freeport, actually. I think Freeport, 2 years ago when we first appeared in front of this committee, I was not particularly optimistic that we would ever get Freeport over the line, and we were getting the impression that Welsh Gov didn't want any Freeport. We're now in a position where they want two, and I think that's partly been some careful and helpful interventions from DLUC at official level and at ministerial level through the channels which IGR provide. Maybe it would have happened anyway, I don't know, but I don't think it's certainly not impeded our eventual, slow progress towards what I think is quite a satisfactory conclusion.
Let's move to funding, because I'm sure funding dominates a lot of the discussion in one way or another. At a Senedd Finance Committee meeting on the 11th of May, they took evidence from the Chief Executive of the Welsh Local Government Association. And he commented, with regard to the Community Resilience Fund, he commented that a good share had come to Wales. I think it was about 46 million that had come. And with regard to the Levelling Up Fund, the first phase of that, I think about 120 million came to Wales. And he said this is about 7% of the allocation across the UK, which is slightly above the 5% benchmark for Wales. Are you happy with the amount of money that is going to Wales at the moment from UK Gov?
Very happy. I think there's £121 million that came to Wales from the Levelling Up Fund, which was well above the sort of 5% baseline. Let me see if I can remember the figures. I think for the community, the CRF, it was about £46 million. And I think even the Community Ownership Fund, it was about £466,000. That's obviously a much smaller one. All of these were significantly above the 5% baseline that Wales would expect. And the exact figures are now, I think...
so much paper on the table.
I think, broadly speaking, those figures are correct.
So, in that same meeting, he was asked about the working relationship, picking up this theme again of the relationship between Wales and UK governments. And he commented that in historic terms, they're probably as good as they've ever been. He also went on to say that a substantial element of increased decision-making power has been given to the local authority sector in Wales. Do you recognise that description?
Yes. I do, and I think what came as a big relief to me anyway, is that it was coming from a reputable, independent third party. And we've been saying it in front of this committee and others for ages. We think the settlements for Wales, whilst we've always loved them, of course we would, they're pretty good. I mean, David's run through the list, and I mean, if you take the block grant, EU tail-off funding, shared prosperity fund, farmers' payments, and growth funds as an example, we've gone from 15.8 billion in 2017-18 to 18.5, about to go to 18.8 in 2023, 18.9 in 2024. These are substantial sums of money, and I absolutely trust the judgment of local authorities and other stakeholders to make some very wise choices about how that should be sent. And I think the implied accusation that somehow this compromises the devolution settlement is utter nonsense. This is devolution as it should be. We're taking devolution to the next level. We're not getting stuck in Cardiff. We're going to 22 local authorities. We're going the whole way across, reaching into every corner of Wales. That's proper devolution.
Actually, may I just throw in there that looking after the growth deals, it's been a pleasure for me to meet with local authority leaders from a range of different parties, including, of course, Labour, Plaid Cymru, Independent. And those meetings have always been hugely constructive, friendly meetings. There's never been any. There's been a realisation that all of us are on the same side in terms of wanting to get good investment and develop projects in all parts of Wales.
Let me move on.
The slightest friction in any of those meetings.
Let me move on then, because my understanding is that was the CRF and the LUF, the Community Resilience Fund and the Levelling Up Fund, but now we have to think about the Shared Prosperity Fund, and I think it's about £585 million in total that UK Gov has pledged for Shared Prosperity funding to Wales. I was surprised then when I saw a letter that had been written to local authority leaders on the 14th of June, so barely a week ago, from Vaughan Gething. And in it, he makes a remarkable statement. He says, "I have made clear to the UK Gov that the Shared Prosperity Fund is an initiative for them to deliver, and that the Welsh Gov will not help deliver UK government programmes in Wales that we consider to be flawed and will not deploy resources for that purpose." What do you make of that? It seems somewhat at odds with the description we heard from the Chief Executive of the Welsh Local Government Association and from what you're telling us today.
I agree. I don't know what to make of it, really. I mean, the area of activity that I thought that we were entirely in sync with is that what we want this money to be used for is the creation of well-paid employment for as many people as possible, for as long as possible, as widely and equitably distributed as possible across Wales. That is what we're doing. And I can't understand why Welsh Government, unless there's some strange political reason that I'm not privy to, I do not see why Welsh Government would want to essentially step in the way of that, if for any other reason to make a cheap political point. I hope Vaughan Gething will be able to say that it isn't that.
In fairness to Mr Gething, because he's not here, he does say in the letter, we will support you if the funding and the spending that you decide on is aligned with Welsh Government priorities, and sets out a 4-page annex to the letter which describes exactly what the Welsh Government...
which I think, by the way, isn't a million miles away. So it isn't a million miles away from what our own priorities are. So if it's about job creation and sustaining good quality jobs and helping people in deprived areas and encouraging inward investment, then there is nothing between us.
To be clear then, what you're saying, if I understand it correctly, I don't want to put words in your mouth, what you're saying is that you have confidence in the relationship that you have, UK Government has, with local authority leaders in Wales, that is working, and the money that it's going there is more than they've received previously, and therefore you have trust in what they're doing?
I absolutely, I've said it before, said it again, I absolutely trust local authorities to make wise decisions on behalf of their local communities, which I think will be entirely in keeping with our own objectives, and I very much hope, I remain optimistic
Well, can I just press you, then I have 1 minute left, I believe, Chairman. 1 minute left. Can I press you on this? Because I think UK government provides some 80% of Welsh government funds, if I'm correct, the figures. And I certainly don't want to misrepresent those. You mentioned earlier distribution, and the distribution was at the heart of the conversation and the questions which the Honourable Member started off with. In April again this year, the Health Minister, Eluned Morgan, made an announcement regarding what she called an ambitious plan to end long waiting times in Wales. Now, we know that there are problems with the Health Board. It's not the health that I want to drive into. But in that announcement, £25.4 million was allocated to South Wales, 0 was allocated to Mid Wales, and 0 was allocated to North Wales. If we're looking for flawed distribution, would you agree that that seems to you that this is an odd distribution for allocating funds?
This was for specifically health funding?
This was specifically health funding. It was an ambitious plan to end long time waiting times in Wales was the headline. And I'm trying to understand here.
Yeah. Well, these formulas are complicated, but I think they deserve very careful scrutiny. The one that I'm familiar with is the local government funding formula, which is used to allocate money across the 22 local authorities in Wales. And it was changed in a way in the early 2000s that meant that South Welsh local authorities seemed to disproportionately benefit. And it was all very subtle. It was all done in terms of, you know, obviously you look at population when you allocate money, that's fair enough, we all understand that, and you have to give a weighting to it. Then they started looking at rurality because it costs more to deliver goods in rural areas, but instead of looking at distance from you know, rurality as you travelled along the road, it was as the crow flies, which meant that a whole load of sparse rural areas lost out on funding. Then there was a lower weighting given to the elderly within the population, which meant that areas with a large number of elderly people didn't get as much as they needed. And the strange thing about it was that rural local authorities lost out, and that various authorities, which coincidentally all seem to be run by the same party, did very, very well out of it. And that's why, to get into it, you have to look very carefully at how these formulas come up. But it is odd that some places do better than others.
I understand that, and I must say I understand the fact that demographics of Wales are such that, whatever it is, 2/3 of the Welsh population lives within about 90 minutes of Cardiff. But what I'm trying to reflect is the frustration that residents, constituents in Aberconwy and many across North Wales feel that there's a sense of being overlooked and underfunded. And I have to say, for one, I welcome the fact that money is going directly to local authorities, because that hopefully removes some of that sense of a distribution which favours a global perspective rather than where need lies in other parts of the country.
And I think, Mr Miller, you'll note that there was a fair degree of transparency about how we calculated which areas were more deprived for the purpose of distributing funds under the levelling up scheme, levelling up fund grants, you know, and that level of transparency is really, really important when you come forward with formulas. And I too would be interested to know what the basis was for calculating the health formula.
I think, Chairman, my time is up, but thank you very much.
The underlying principle, one of the many underlying principles between, which defines levelling up, is the stark reality that skills and innovation are reasonably evenly spread across the whole of the UK, but opportunity isn't. Now, that's not in the health context that you refer, that may not be quite so relevant, but in terms of the funding distribution that we're trying to achieve, that is exactly what we are looking at in detail.